My father Duke and Lord Kevin Webb the Habsburg, grandson of the last Prince of Austria and Hungary Prince Sebastian Habsburg, had a form of the laugh-sounding disorder portrayed in the movie The Joker. Not in the same context as the movie though. It is described as pseudobulbar effect, or PBA. It is a condition that is characterized by short episodes of sudden laughing-like noises that seem inappropriate if assumed to be laughter. The problem is usually caused by an acquired brain injury of some type. As his only legitimate child, I would like to point out that when it did happen, it was always in very short bursts and didn't sound genuinely like laughter to me at all. I knew when he really laughed and when he didn't. He had a reputation as being quite well liked, wise, funny, and respected. And a romantic type, but not as if a weakness. He did get labeled by others as seeming to laugh out of context regularly, but only after he developed the slight brain injury issue. He had an indigenous Gippsland Australian mother too, who was a vision-impaired Duchess of Austria and Lady of Hungary when he was born in 1930. It was never seen as laughter by me when it happened though. It didn't have the emotional vibe of laughter. Just a similar noise and body movement, similar to a reflex action, type thing. My father Kevin had a heart attack, semi-died, and was revived by an indigenous friend with CPR before I was born. I was drowned the day I was born and revived with CPR by Kaiser Adolf Hitler the Hohenzollern, who was on holiday in Gippsland, which was very handy at the time. Kaiser Adolf, then Crown Prince, needed his heart massaged by hand when having emergency surgery on the Western Front during WW1 after being wounded with a machine gun. My grandfather Ioseb, Stalin, had a few incidents when he was alive. I am descended from a long list of people who died, but not to brain dead, and got revived, or were near death and got kept alive. My father Duke and Lord Kevin's father Duke and Lord James Webb the Habsburg was a direct beneficiary of the Habsburg Royal Family estate owned by his grandfather Prince Sebastian. Prince Sebastian was eventually put in palliative care terminally ill in the 1950s. My father Kevin Webb the Habsburg was supposed to move to Vienna into the main Habsburg palace when Sebastian died, with the rest of the family. It was a request to the beneficiaries of the last prince's estate in his will. My father Kevin just lived his life as best he could without factoring it in. He never seemed like he was waiting to move to Vienna at all. Put it that way. More normal living a life stuff, instead of the retard tabloid land fake hysterical excitement for the future crap, as if in breathless anticipation, like a terrorist pretending to be about to steal the ultimate crime jackpot, 4 years on end. I'm guessing people thought he should have his bags packed permanently to be ready any minute. If you understand their lunatic attitude. I will mention here that my grandmother Donna Podolski and 2 lookalikes of hers did him over for 2 years, for 8 children born without his consent in the early 1950s. Donna had divorced my grandfather Ioseb, Stalin, Djugashvili in 1942. 2 of them pretended to be the same woman for casual sex 12 months apart, claiming to be on contraception. Then Donna, my grandmother, did the same 6 months later and then lived with him for 3 months in my family home at 27, Campbell Street, Yarragon. After 3 months, she packed her bags and left suddenly and never told him why. He was paying off the house he bought in his preferred location of Yarragon afterwards. It was the one place in the world he wanted to buy a house in, put it that way. Whilst he was quietly working to pay it off, he wasn't a shy type, but kept family-oriented things in close. My father Kevin was deliberately misdiagnosed as having a form of mental illness shortly after Donna disappeared. They eventually pretended it was schizophrenia in his mid-20s. He was told he would be getting the usual medication for the diagnosed problem. He was given some information and did some research because he thought he would be prescribed the pills. He was then refused the usual medication prescribed to people diagnosed with schizophrenia in Australia at the time. They had called in crazy Tasmanians pretending to be Spanish medical staff and some real Spanish lunatics already in the country or imported. They tortured him for no valid reason. They pretended he was prescribed experimental brain electric shock treatment for his deliberately misdiagnosed schizophrenia. They actually laid him down and electric shocked his brain with handheld electrode plates, like seen in several movies, such as An Angel at My Table. They still have the equipment as if souvenirs of torturing a left-handed royal and Gippslander. It was pointless horrid abuse by lunatics with unofficial permission from Australia who were pretending to experiment on him to attempt to force him to pretend to be right-hand because he was left-handed royalty. They kept doing things to him all his life in some way. Absolutely infuriating and pointless in every way. Completely purposeless violence and abuse for no valid reason. His indigenous family background and connections were probably an unfair used excuse as well. I heard some information that stated 12 of the last 13 Spanish monarchs have been left-handed, approximately. I'm no expert. There is a lunatic cult that dedicated to pretending to experiment on left-handers to attempt to make them pretend to be right-hand. It got violent quite often. They are exactly the same types that are currently infested in Australia in large numbers. This country has a hideous track record of appearing to do, or apathetically ignore, completely unjustifiable unofficial deals with groups who want to victimize particular natural genetic groupings, particularly since Federation. They hang a sign and hope people go into denial with a "no way, it is not, that's too horrible, how awful, they wouldn't really do that." Game over. That is an everyone is inevitably going to die in 1993 thing at heart. See the chapter Nostradamus, What a Legend. I am part Spanish through my biological great-grandmother Janet Podolski, aka Eva Braun, 1944-5 with the neo-Nazis. I am a biological relative of the Franco family and part Zorro. The latter seems quite strongly ancestral sometimes. Things reached a tipping point for my dad in his early 20s. Horrible abuse of him, faked as experimental electric shock treatment for mental illness, is what caused the brain injury that caused the pseudobulbar effect disorder. I still get stalked by Tasmanians, old Spanish nurses and their children, who still brag about torturing left-handers in Gippsland as if given permission to do so by the Australian government. Threats against me are usually daily and completely inappropriate. I have even had one young man look at me and say, "That's what you get for having a go at my mother for reminding you of her electric shocking your father to me at a gay venue." They fondle the equipment used to violate people with back then to tease descendants and family. They have kept them as if souvenirs. My father took quite a while to recover as best he could from the victimization. When he did, he started getting out more, and things like marriage became part of his thinking. He did not have to worry about my Habsburg Royal Family estate though. When he met my mother in 1957, there were already around 10 eligible Webb family great-grandchildren of Prince Sebastian Habsburg. People's attempt to claim there was pressure for him to produce a child before Prince Sebastian died just didn't compute, so to speak. The concepts they were attempting to imply were completely out of context. My father Kevin was born in 1930. The Habsburg Royal Family estate was illegally withheld from my Webb family here in Australia when the last Prince Sebastian Habsburg died in 1960, when my dad was around 30. My great-grandfather, the last Prince Sebastian Habsburg, left a written specific request in his will that all his eligible children who emigrated to Australia prior to 1912 with the surname Webb and their eligible descendants move to Austria and live together in the main Habsburg Palace in Vienna when he died. The Habsburg Royal Family estate is still illegally withheld from my Webb family, has been for over 60 years. The teasing of the eligible descendants of Prince Sebastian about everyone not getting to go and reside in the main palace in Vienna in the 1960s is incessant. I was born in 1972. They teased that theoretically I could have been born in the palace in Vienna. There was a huge lunatic out-of-context tease on about my father's potential firstborn child to his new wife when he married on the 3rd of May, 1958, aged 27. He was still recovering from the brain electric shocks they violated him with for nothing in his mid-20s. He never had schizophrenia at all. His mental issues were more likely caused by females who lied and said they were on contraception, having children he didn't consent to after sex with him. And his short 3-month in-home relationship with fatal attraction-style ex-wife of my grandfather Ioseb, Stalin, Djugashvili, Donna Podolski, was likely a huge factor, too. As an example of the lunatic's attitude, people say they have noticed that the Sit-Kilda FC stick figure logo usually looks left-handed because any object it is depicted holding is usually in its right hand. If the ball is in your right hand, you handball the ball with your left then. Some anti-left-handed lunatics say that, obviously. That assumption caused incessant talk by lunatics pretending Sit-Kilda FC's club crest is a Spanish Inquisition symbol. As if the club is volunteering for investigation and experimentation into how to make a left-hander pretend to be right-hand. As if the change can be done. Which it can't. My father Kevin's firstborn legitimate child was automatically eligible to become a Habsburg Royal, and my father's grandfather Prince Sebastian Habsburg was terminally ill in palliative care in Europe when my father Kevin got married and his new wife was confirmed as pregnant. It got obsessively out of hand by 1959, just before the firstborn was supposed to be born. They swapped my father's wife for an identical lookalike just after his new wife got pregnant for the first time in mid-1958. The new married couple, my parents but not any other child who grew up in my household's parents, had only lived together for 3 months when they did the swap. The imposter wife who started pretending to be my father Kevin's wife in mid-1958 was pregnant with the grandchild of a neo-Nazi who was arrested, charged and tried at Nuremberg after WW2. That particular neo-Nazi escaped a maximum security prison in Germany in December 1943, then joined the terrorism group that illegally freed him from jail. The neo-Nazis. He then was given the illegal job of running the prison he was in before his escape, when the terrorism group involved, the neo-Nazis, started filling it with homosexual males illegally detained from the public population in Germany starting December 1943. He then tortured my father's grandfather Prince Sebastian Habsburg when Sebastian was illegally held in Dachau prison by escaped former inmates during 1944-45. The escaped prisoner involved was pretending to be Hermann Going whilst doing it, made over by a film production crew to look the part. Going was in the jail with the other illegally detained homosexuals. Completely hideous. They did the swap of my mother for her lookalike to replace the idea of a new eligible Royal Habsburg child with the granddaughter of someone who tortured my father's grandfather Prince Sebastian Habsburg in Dachau in Germany between January 1944 and the end of WW2 in mid-1945 instead. They also teased that the firstborn could look exactly like my father's mother Duchess and Lady Myrtle Webb the Habsburg, who died in the early 1950s and was a much-loved vision-impaired person. That teasing resulted in the Barbie doll being allegedly based on my grandmother Duchess and Lady Myrtle, indigenous niece of General Sir John Monash the indigenous Anzac, based on footage of her in the Guard of Honor at his state funeral and photographs. Myrtle had been illegally removed from her parents and forced adopted to the Cook family as a child when they decided to pretend she was half European, because she was albino. Some people think the state of Victoria law involved was only introduced to get at the quote, white albino Aboriginal children. Baby thefts worldwide tended to be particular natural genetic types from the spread details, like pattern bald. A lot of those illegal children confiscations happened during wartime years. When I was 3, my great-grandfather Kaiser Adolf Hitler the Hohenzollern asked me who my great-grandmother was. I asked my father and told Kaiser Adolf it was a woman called Ada Snowden-Cooper. Adolf knew that Ada was the mother of Prince Sebastian Habsburg's legitimate children from Sebastian being his official consort in 1943 in Germany already. We discovered both Adolf and Sebastian, officially the Hohenzollern royal couple in Germany 1943-44, were both my great-grandfathers. Kaiser Adolf started crying almost immediately I said the name Ada Snowden-Cooper. Then that Kaiser Adolf was with Prince Sebastian when he died in 1960 as the last prince of the Habsburg dynasty. Adolf's predecessor cousin Wilhelm II was also the last monarch of the Kingdom of Prussia when he died in 1941. Kaiser Adolf took diplomatic asylum in Italy on the 12th of August 1961, and the East German administration began building the Berlin Wall the following day. My father Kevin's attitude towards homosexuals was impeccable. Sort of faultless. As faultless as my grandfather Ioseb, Stalin, Djugashvili's attitude as well, probably, who was a royal ineligible but legitimate Romanov. The teasing of my father and his eligible brothers and sisters that they all could have moved to then main Vienna Palace, then urban apartment palaces and country properties in Austria and Hungary if the royal Habsburg estate had been correctly distributed in 1960 was incessant, still is. All the properties, over 100 of them, are still empty deserted. But look fine on the outside. I own quite a few, and they are all Webb family property. The most obvious annoyances in this country are still a cover-up. They pretend people don't notice if the cover-up gets worse than the things being covered up from the past. Which they all have since satellite weapons got launched. Complicating matters was my Habsburg royal family, including my dad, being related to the old French royal family traced back to the same emperor, Louis XIV, where the surname Webb comes from, as Emperor Napoleon. My indigenous Gippsland great-great-great-grandmother Princess Louise, also Queen Louise of Prussia, had private meetings with Napoleon during the 1790s after marrying Kaiser Frederick Wilhelm III. Napoleon was severely vision impaired. I have similar hips in the genetic ancestors parts blended DNA kit that is a body to Napoleon. My hair is very similar to Louis XIV of France. Everyone who carries on with all of it is wasting their time with me. I'm a lock. People always pretend they are a new, stressful, fresh, mesmerizing angle at me. But I've already experienced it all firsthand and have ancestral memory histories about that sort of thing before satellite weapons and tracking, terrestrial emitters, and fake disease epidemics. It bores me to occasional tears. They pretend it is endlessly entertaining, their biggest weakness as compulsive liars. Some people pretend lying is the most entertaining thing anyone can ever do, and anyone who doesn't is boring and lacks imagination. I will not be pretending a living person whose right hand is my father. My father Duke and Lord Kevin died in 2004. They always try the name Jack first when doing it to me. Pathetic. Trying to torture me into pretending my father was not left-handed is absolutely unacceptable. This heaps big, short-statured, Hohenzollern albino somnambulist homosexual has no parents anymore. One of my legitimate ancestors, Julius Caesar, was also a big-statured, short-statured, albino, somnambulist, homosexual. People do not have to lie about historical information to cover up victimization of particular natural genetic groups in Australia, including by people who are stupid enough to travel here from a particular foreign country as if unofficial endorsed and sponsored by government. Everyone knows all their routines to pretend to cover up that past that is still happening now. From obvious vulgar corruption and cheating and victimization in professional sports leagues here. It's hung like a big sign, but it doesn't say, come here to attempt to do it and you're likely to end up in a body bag, like it should. Teams that don't steal identities do better in the real sports world than people who don't. They still use constant and bulk visual, graphic, and audio references in everything they interfere with the results in illegally. It always mentions association football teams in European-aligned leagues that I inherited shares in the 1980s. Particularly the footy. There are often YouTube videos with annoying buzzing noises all the way through them that say the team names. Combine all that with an attempt to terrorize, threaten, hypnotize me with a list of demands during the 1980 Moscow Olympics that I didn't watch when I was 8, and it has been very ugly for way too long. I am always grateful when the worst get what's coming to them. Russian-themed media here is a basket case lunatic vaudeville terrorism crazy Broadway style, still threatening the 8-year-old me, now in my 50s, if it doesn't do what it was told a thing here. Including the media fiction history similar to the material about Kaiser Adolf. Everything about that country here is like intellectual lunatic vomit that I won't clean up, no matter what they do. Their worst lunatics are world loser lunatics at pretending radiation weapons are the thing that will be used to find a way to replace actual ancestral family memory history with fictional media. Their worst lunatics can tend to be from parts of the old Soviet Union that are not part of the current Russia. I haven't taken anything on the media here about Russia seriously as if genuine since the mid-1980s. Germans don't understand that. Australian loons get on secretly famously with the Russian lunatics. Sycophantic co-corruption, even. It was a group of lunatics from Spain that were responsible for originally thinking of the concept of pretending to replace my predecessor Kaiser Adolf Hitler the Hohenzollern with an intentionally illegally inbred child, bred with his stolen sperm during World War II. In part if not fully responsible. There was an attempt to breed one in the sister of his biological cousin, heinously evil and repugnant lunatic Albert Einstein, after Kaiser Adolf was abducted in December 1943 from a dinner in a hotel in Berlin, hosted by Einstein's sister Sadie. Sadie self-aborted the fetus at around 3 months gestated, sitting at a table outside his cell bars in April 1944. She tried to make him scream hysterically and attempt to lunge at her with his arms through the bars to make him stop, as if she was murdering his only option for an heir and successor. So, hello lunatics from Spain and their associates. They were wrong about the only possible chance concept. I will not be being replaced with a child illegally inbred with my stolen sperm, even if every lunatic on the planet thinks it would be finishing the crime now. There are always demands for my shares in Europe-based teams to be illegally signed over to their terrorism groups, along with the back earnings and memorabilia that stays mine even if the shares change hands. The AFL has been pumped full of references to the teams I own shares in constantly since the 1980s. Incompetent Australian sports beggar teams full of imported, organised crime, fake royalty have had the cork in too tight with them for decades. They always pretend they will tell Australians what sports to play and what will not be played anymore in the end. The loser faggot terrorism failure from the 24 hours a day publicised September 2001 terrorism incident was bred with Albert Einstein's sperm apparently. Possibly born in Tasmania. It pretended to be a stripper come goal umpire in a costume during a final in 1998 and ruined the result for the away team. They have wasted a massive percentage of their resources on faking vile video and audio to replace the real stuff back to the 1960s for platforms like YouTube. People who pretend actual memories can be replaced with fictional media, particularly via chemicals and cathode ray tube-like radiation, are completely insane beyond any form of measure. They are going to try to pump platforms like YouTube full of fictional sports footage carefully recorded by lunatics and added using computers depicting events that did not really occur, where people have the real original game on DVD, and add them to public media. Like past grand finals. They intended to do one full expensive green screen CGI video to replace actual events people have had copies of for years for every official disqualification that has not been announced, and pretend the fake stuff, depicting the disqualified cheats as the really winning team, is all people are allowed to discuss on pain of torture. There have been around 17 premierships or so change hands in the AFL due to disqualifications since 2019, the 1997 AFL Grand Final being the first. Due to doping, illegal substance use, match-fixing convictions, etc. All publicly recorded and available to view in court records. They have not announced any yet. Lunatics are pretending to experiment with fake CGI video and YouTube to get people to ignore the DSQs and pretend the new fictional footage is what happened. They've just started uploading it and getting convicted cheats to chant about it constantly to try to get people to watch the fake play clips. They plan to confiscate any DVD, computer file, audio recording, or videotape that had the original footage on it, like it's post-WW2 media about Germany or something. They decided to start with the 1971 Grand Final on YouTube in response to the AFL being ordered to produce new DVDs correctly depicting St Kilda FC as the premiership winning team in 1971, after Hawthorn was disqualified for match fixing after convictions were secured in November 2021. The lunatics, including people from the disqualified team, decided to pretend to fictionalize the 1971 Grand Final for YouTube, adding fake video to the game. The new faked passages of play edited into the 1971 game, because St Kilda FC was awarded the premiership that year after match-fixing convictions were secured in 2021, could not be produced to look like they had the original Southern stand in the background in the new footage. They have added it to the past game anyway, even though it has the current Shane Warne stand in the background, built in the 1990s. They think it is a better effort than pretending Janet Podolski, as fictitious character Eva Braun, was Kaiser Adolf Hitler the Hohenzollern's fiancée and girlfriend since she was 16, which they started faking after he was abducted and made a prisoner of war in December 1943, and expanded on after the television was invented though. The reality of the situation here on Earth, particularly since the television was made commercially available to the public after World War II, may kick in quickly if you understand what I mean.